Hi, I'm Mackenzi.
Hey, I'm Denise, and welcome to the podcast from Rundown to Renewed.
We're continuing through the Armor of God. Like we've said in the past, a lot of this comes from Priscilla Shire's The Armor of God study. We recommend that you get it, and because we're going to continue breaking this down. So, Ephesians 6:14 to 16, we're adding on a verse today. Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one. This is so cool. I love this little part here because we are going into active faith,
Mm,
and that is the shield for us.
yes.
We're now, the last three things we talked about were all about putting on our armor, and now we're talking about taking up our armor, having that action.
Yeah, and in James 2:20, right? One of the famous verses where it talks about faith
Mm,
without works is dead.
yeah.
It's useless, right? And the reality is you can have all the faith in the world, but if there's no work, if there's no stepping forward in faith, like we talked about last week with the shoes of peace, right? You're we will never ever see the results of our what our faith is supposed to bring.
Mm,
You know, faith really reveals our reliance or lack thereof on God, right? And so faith says it says less about us and more about what we believe about God. Right? So in scripture, like it's a test. Do you believe who God says he is?
right.
What he says he's going to do, because that's where the faith is activated. It's in that belief, it's in that trust, right? And when we step out in faith, like we are we are showing and like we are determined to believe
Mm,
when we do such a thing.
yeah, I kind of think about like friendships in this kind of. I have a friend that has a hard time like keeping or creating real friendships. They're all surface level.
Yeah.
And it's because she's put up these walls and she's not vulnerable. And, you're not going to reap the benefits of a true friendship that you desire if you're not willing to be vulnerable.
Mm.
And in the same way, if you believe God is faithful, then you'll be able to step out on the water when he says to come.
Right. Well, that's a vulnerable, like faith is vulnerable.
Right.
Absolutely. And so, just like think about how faithful is God,
Mm,
right? So when you think about Jesus coming and being born, right? His first breath has already fulfilled so many prophecies, right? Just by breathing.
yeah.
I mean, that's just him as an infant, as literally just being born, right? Like, I think about that song, How Great Is Thy Faithfulness,
Hmm.
and I hear such a thing. And, God hangs every star in the sky. He is completely aware of galaxies that we haven't even discovered.
Yeah.
That always blows my mind. I remember when I was a youth pastor and I did a sermon about how big God is. And I remember like kind of mapping out, like showing pictures of the world getting smaller and the galaxy and like all these things. And it's like, and this is how teeny, teeny, tiny you are.
Right.
And God still so deeply loves you and
Hmm.
wants a relationship with you. Like, how amazing is that?
Right.
You know, um, God has the earth spinning at just the right speed to keep us all upright and moving and breathing, to sustain our lives. He's controlling everything. And yet, you know, will we allow him to have control over our lives?
Mm,
And so because he is faithful, we can have faith,
yeah.
and so we were kind of chatting through this because these are like amazing things, and they prove how amazing God is and how faithful he is and how big he is, but when our own worlds are kind of spinning in circles, it's really easy to forget God's faithfulness. It's easy to forget how big he is and how, like just all these things about him. And so, for me, like, how do I help myself focus on God's faithfulness? We talked a lot about trials in the last episode. And so, like last a few months ago, I was just having a tough time. Just kind of a weird, like nothing crazy, but just hard. And I remember thinking, you know what? I've gotten through like so much worse. So much worse than what I'm facing right now. And yeah, this isn't fun and I don't love it. And I know that I'm going to get through it because God's going to walk with me through this hard moment, hard few weeks, just like he's walked with me through every other hard season. And so for me, it's really about looking back
Yeah.
and seeing how has he been faithful before, because when your emotions and your feelings and all that stuff starting to get the best of you and it's swirling everywhere, it's like remind yourself to plant yourself
Mm,
and just look back
yeah.
because you'll be able to see it.
I think in those moments too, it's really important to pray for like your eyes to be shifted, your
Yeah.
mind to be shifted to see God's perspective versus your own. Because again, if you have kids and something is happening in their life, it's this big dramatic thing because that's their world, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And we are like the children going through something.
Absolutely.
It's this big and dramatic thing, but the Lord is like, hey, like, I got this. And
Yeah.
if we can take just an ounce of his perspective, that's what I pray for all the time in
Mm,
my times. Like, shift my perspective, Lord, shift my perspective.
that's so good. That's a great analogy with the parent and the child. Yeah. Because we can always see it differently than they can.
Right.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have a
That's
bigger
good.
picture.
That's really good. So let's see. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I lost it. So when you're looking around and you're having a hard time, right? Like pick up your shield
Yeah.
and keep seeking the Lord. And he's going to reveal his faithfulness to you when you do that.
Yeah. In the Bible, there's over 8,000 opportunities for faith. And I think it's cool because in a lot of these stories, there are opportunities within someone's reach. It's not
Mm,
just put right into their hand. And what God is calling us to, he will equip us for, just like he did in all of the stories within the Bible.
right, right. So let's chat, nitty gritty. Let's keep putting this armor together as we've done in previous episodes. Okay, so the shield, right, in the Roman soldier uniform. The shield is about 2 feet wide and 4 foot long, kind of like a door, a
Mm,
short door, but a door. Okay, so there's canvas and leather in the center. Okay, and then the edges are iron, so it can withstand swords, right? And so the entire body can be hidden. Like you can crunch down and be hidden by this shield. Okay, so when they're advancing, the shields would be held out in front. And when arrows were coming at them, they could kind of group together and link their shields to kind of form like a shell overhead. So when the arrows would come, they'd be safe. Like they wouldn't be pierced by any arrows coming at them, right? And sometimes they fought with fire. And so they would even like wet their shields first because if someone ended up throwing like fiery darts, then their shields wouldn't catch on fire. There's a lot of preparation and like thought that's
yeah.
going into this physical shield, right? So, and the thing is when they would kind of fight with fire, it was a distraction, right? Because then you're trying to put out a fire and all these things are going on and you're not really focused on the battle at
Right.
hand, right?
Yeah.
Because their attention would be turned away from the main priority.
So in our personal lives, the enemy sends fiery javelins at you
Mm,
too strictly to distract you.
right.
We can have all these internal fires inside of us
Yeah.
so that we don't advance against him.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are weak and vulnerable, the enemy can use that to advance in our personal life. Insecurity creeps in, and oh, now you don't want to step out in faith anymore.
That's right.
He can have you questioning what if. That creates anxiety inside of us. And God doesn't give us fear. Scripture says that God does not give us the power of fear, but the power of a sound mind. And once we start stepping out in faith, stepping out into the water, that turtle shell that Denise was explaining about is going up. And every try the enemy takes will not prosper.
Right. So that faith is guarding you.
Yes.
Right. So, something to think about is, what is it that God has called you to do? What is it that he's called you to step out in faith?
Mm.
What convictions are you having? You know, and if there isn't anything coming up for you, like, we really just want to encourage you to ask God, and he'll reveal it to you. 100%. And so, is God asking you, like, are you supposed to ask for forgiveness from someone? And when you do such a thing, like, you are not only you're receiving the benefit and the blessing of faith when you do that.
Yeah.
Right? Forgiveness is huge. And, maybe God's telling you that you need to take a different job. Maybe it has less pay, though. That's scary, right?
Yeah.
Is he asking you to start a ministry? Is he asking you to take in a child? Is he asking you to homeschool? Like, whatever it is, right? We all have different things in different areas of our lives. But whenever you decide to step out in faith with what God has called you to do, that shield goes up.
Right.
So it's like this faith, the faith protects you. We're talking about these fiery darts coming from the enemy, but wait, when you choose to step out in faith and not be, and the fear and the overwhelm and all of that, you choose to not allow that to distract you, to not let it overwhelm you, you're actually more protected when you step out in faith.
Right.
And so we were chatting through this question ourselves of, what is God calling us to?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I am actually in the process of refining some of my coaching to focus on victims of abuse. And I just really felt strongly that I just think there are a lot of women and men that have suffered from some form of abuse, be it mental, emotional, physical, psychological, narcissistic. There's a lot of abuse out there, unfortunately. And whether it's through a spouse or through family or through work, there's a lot of things happening. And when you're in an abusive situation, you start to sort of walk around as a half version of yourself because you're believing a lot of the things that, these toxic abusive people are saying to you. And so this is like still a little, this is like, I'm getting out of my comfort zone here in sharing this, but I really do feel like that's who I'm supposed to be serving.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because my business coach told me, you need to share this. Like, you need to start pitching your business in this way at different business meetings that I go to. And so I went to a women's business meeting for the very first time. Never met any of these women, and but they were all lovely, with great conversation. And when it came time for the commercials, I got up and I shared a few things, and then this is who I feel called to do, so on and so forth. And one of the women got emotional hearing me talk about it, and the others were, one of them was like, I'm I'm a survivor of abuse, and she's done a lot of her own healing work, and she was just like, I love what you're doing. I mean, there was just the support. Yeah. Was, I'm going into this and I'm nervous, and these are all strangers, and I walk out of it feeling so confident that, okay, that to me, that was just confirmation. Mm-hmm. This is what you're supposed to do. And the few people that I've shared this with and share, like, kind of working through some business ideas about it, everyone's like, Denise, this is absolutely
Hmm.
needed. You
Yeah.
need to do this. You absolutely need to do this. And so, oh, it's
So she's doing it.
so I'm doing it. And it's exciting and scary and but I really do believe that I just want men and women to walk around as who they are created to be
Exactly.
and to turn trauma into triumph.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. And sometimes we don't get that like validation when we're stepping out in fear.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so I want to encourage those of you that have been hurt before
Mm-hmm.
stepping out. I have been hurt
Mm-hmm.
by people that I considered friends, and you know gossip and hurtful things were said when I was stepping out in faith. And there's this study that was done with children. There was a box, and you would pull back the lid, and as you pull it back, a pretend spider comes and like touches and attacks your hand. And these kids, freak out obviously because there's a spider coming at them. And then they're given a second box, which looks similar. And because of what had happened to them with this prior box, they open this next box very cautiously. They know something bad is going to happen. They know something's going to pop out at them. But inside that box is candy. And I think sometimes when we have stepped out in faith and we have been hurt because of it by other people for whatever reason, we sometimes decide to stop. We're not going to do it anymore. So I want to encourage those of you that have stepped out in faith and have been met with those flaming arrows. They will come, but don't let that hinder you from stepping out into what God has called you to right now. Because, in the Bible, God calls a lot of people to places that are unknown, right? Abraham was going to a land that he had no idea about. Esther was willing to fight for all of her people without knowing the ramifications that could even happen to her.
Yep.
She could have died. The disciples just left everything, all of their family and home to go be with Jesus. You know, stepping into circumstances where God has to come through is faith.
Yes. Amen.
And when we do that, we send the enemy to flight.
Mm.
He has no power when we're stepping out in faith.
That's so good. That's so good. So, another really cool example of this is in Luke 5. And, Simon's been fishing all night and nothing, catches absolutely nothing. And so the next morning, Jesus, gets in the boat and he's giving a sermon. And then afterwards, he tells Simon, listen, go out into deep water with me and let out the net. And Simon is like, okay, he's rationalizing.
Mm,
Well, or probably rationalizing, right? Like, all right, well, we don't fish during the day. We fish at night. We fish in shallow water, not deep water. What is this? But, you know, Jesus' instructions, like they completely go against what Simon knew, right?
right.
But Simon says, okay, Lord, at your bidding, I will do it.
Mm,
I mean, that's faith.
yeah. I think a lot of times too, we can rationalize ourselves out of stepping out
Mm-hmm.
in faith,
Yep.
because Simon could have easily been like, this doesn't make sense. We're not doing it.
That's
But
right.
he said, this doesn't make sense, but I'm going to do it
That's
anyways,
right.
you know?
Yes.
So in Isaiah, it tells us that God's ways are not our ways. Like we
Mm,
cannot think like him. And so we're left with
yeah.
faith in
Oof.
him.
Yep.
And it's really cool because when we rely on that faith, Jesus allows us to be a partner in miracles.
Mm,
Because when he said, cast out the net, Jesus could have easily cast out the net himself. He's Jesus.
you could have called the fish into the boat.
Right.
Like,
But he had Simon do it. He allowed Simon to partner with him to be a part of this miracle because so many fish came that Simon, his boat couldn't even contain the fish. So he had to signal to the other fishermen and another boat to come. And all of that happened because Simon was willing to step out in faith.
And as this is happening, like Simon couldn't even come up with words
Mm,
to the other fishermen, right? Like he just motioned for them to come. Like he was probably completely stunned
probably.
at this moment because it goes against everything he knows. It
Hmm.
goes against everything that he understands and knows about fishing, right? It's his career. Like
Yeah.
this is not the way, Jesus, but apparently when you follow Jesus, it is the way. He does say he's the way, the truth, and the life.
That's right.
And so I think sometimes we can put God in a box and just, well, it has to go this way because this makes the most sense,
Yeah.
but it, I think we do ourselves such a disservice and him too when we do that. And because we are his children, we have access to him, which means we have access to everything. Like just the God, he's the God of abundance,
Mm.
right? And from this story, it's like, man, God set Simon up for more than he could ever handle.
Mm.
And that can be true for us too
Yeah.
when we step out in faith. And if you doubt that, just look at Ephesians 3:20.
Mm.
He can do exceedingly abundantly above and beyond anything you could ever think, ask, or imagine. I just want you to claim that. Even if you wrestle to believe it,
Yeah.
just speak that out loud over your life.
Yeah.
Because you never ever know what God can do when you take, right? And it just takes a mustard seed of faith
Hmm.
to move mountains.
That's right.
So plant that seed.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much.
I think it's so powerful to think that God's setting you up for more than you can contain.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like in a good way. It's a
Yeah.
good overwhelm. Yeah.
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 All right. So we'll end with some discussion questions like we always do. So the first one is what has you distracted in your life right now?
Yes. So for me, I think I definitely have some fear over, you know, just switching up this coaching and being more specific and in the target audience and um, you know, am I equipped for it? Can I do it? And Mackenzie, when we were chatting through this, Mackenzie's like, yeah, you have this. Like this is not, but we look at ourselves differently than the people who love us look at us.
Right.
And so,
Well, and just logically, can I speak logically to you?
yeah, speak logically. I love
If I
logic.
am looking for someone to help me, it always is good to hear from someone that has gone through it and can
Mm,
speak through it
yeah.
versus someone that just thinks they know and
Yeah.
can say what you're feeling and
Yeah.
everything. So, yes, 100% qualified there.
Yeah. So I'm pushing through it,
Yeah.
but it's there. Yeah.
And then for me, I just always struggle with the thoughts inside my head, those self-limiting thoughts that I have. So, um, those can distract me
Mhm.
really easily. And thankfully, I've been laying them at the Lord's feet, and He's revealing so much about my brain. But yeah, those self limiting thoughts. And I know that it's easy to get stuck in those and spiral from them
Yeah.
and then make no movements. So,
Yeah. They can be paralyzing if you let them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Second question: how will you step out in faith today?
So it is one of my goals to reach out to different like women support groups. There are quite a few that support women who've been in abusive situations or are currently in abusive situations. And so um, that's on my radar. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you are listening right now and you know of a group or you help with a group or just if you know of someone that's in just a, a toxic, hard situation, I'd be honored to learn more.
Yeah. And for me to step out in faith, I think that it's important to talk about going through those hurtful seasons, like I talked about earlier, when people are saying untrue things about you or anything, you still continue to trust God and
Mm.
step out in faith. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue to trust God and step out in faith, and use my voice, speak at conferences, whatever God calls me to, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to continue stepping out in faith, one step in front of the other.
Um,
So we do have our conference happening this month,
yeah,
February 22nd. Make sure you register for that. We'll have the link below. Make sure you subscribe and follow all of our channels to get this out into the world.
absolutely.
Go.
And we also have sorry.
No, go ahead.
So we also have launched a From Rundown to Renewed conference. So
Mhm.
if you are a church leader or know of women's ministry leaders and you are curious to learn more about what all that entails, we would love to chat with you. If you need keynote speakers at your women's conferences, we would love to chat with you there too.
Yeah. We are both life coaches and coach one-on-one also. So
Mhm.
make sure you reach out for us with us to schedule your one-on-one session. And if you are feeling run down,
There is space for you at our table.